Companies have never created more life-changing, innovative products and services. And yet, too often, the very employees who bring us those wonderful things have never felt less satisfied in their jobs. Understanding this paradox and what you can do about it is key to unlocking employee engagement in great CX. This week, the CX self-narrative gap. This week we're going to talk about an incredibly powerful concept in CX, the self-narrative gap. Over the summer, I had the chance to talk to a whole variety of Customerville clients in Europe, the US, and in Asia about this, and it's rapidly kind of becoming a core component of their customer experience, and in particular their VOC initiatives. So what is the CX self-narrative gap, and why is it so important for CX leaders to understand it? Well, I want to start the explanation by showing you a really cool chart. Take a look at this. This is a chart showing adoption rates of all kinds of wonderful, life-changing technologies, products and services, things that have changed our lives for the better as we've adopted them over the past decades. And on balance, they've made our lives longer, fuller, healthier. It's really amazing. Now I'm going to overlay another line on this chart, one that's not so cool. Take a look at this. This line shows how happy we are at work, how content we are. Basically, we are in a 30-year kind of slow motion slide in that regard. You could be forgiven for asking just what the hell is going on here. At a point in history where so many companies are doing so many things to make life better, more frictionless, easier, the very same employees who are actually delivering those things have never felt less gratified about their role in it. What is going on there? I want to overlay this blue line on the chart for a moment. This is kind of a sort of average plot line for all of those wonderful innovations and their adoption rates. And when I do that, you can see this growing gap between the two trends kind of pop into focus. That gap, that growing gap, is what we call the self-narrative gap. It's the difference between the truth of the good stuff that your company does and that lackluster level of employee engagement resulting from there simply not being engaged in that story. Companies have become almost obsessively focused with gathering metrics and KPIs, and yet very often they fail at doing this one very, very important thing, which is controlling and even reinforcing the positive narrative of the CX story of their companies to their employees. And that's a shame, because the positive narrative of what your company does has perhaps more power than any other thing you can do to drive employee engagement. And you need that engagement if you're going to have authentically great CX. Listen, companies in the US alone will invest something like $5 billion this year in enterprise feedback. And that number is expected, even just over the next few years, to double. So that's a lot of money. And unfortunately, very often, those investments fail to pan out. They underperform. And if you want to know why, this is a big part of the reason. Let's look at what companies typically do. You've probably seen a lot of this yourself. First, they obsessively gather and distribute KPIs. The second thing they do is they hope that simply by measuring and monitoring that things will sort of miraculously improve on their own. And when that doesn't pan out, they attempt to buy employee engagement through financial incentives in positive CX metrics. You know, Maxie Schmidt and Sam Stern from Forrester recently published a report on the many ways that financial incentives for CX kind of backfire. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend that you do it. And they make no bones about the fact that the vast majority of the time, companies' attempts to give financial incentives to encourage employees to deliver great CX fail. That doesn't work out. Here are a couple of pieces of research they share in the report that I thought you should see. These really resonated with me. The first one is this: while 85% of companies use variable pay, only 13% of employees feel engaged. And this one also kind of hits where it hurts. 90% of adults spend half their waking lives doing things they would rather not be doing at places they'd rather not be. Ouch. Listen, Max and Sam's report does a great job of kind of spotlighting this huge, kind of too often overlooked fact of life. What is it that motivates us to work? Why are we here? It turns out money's far from the most important thing. It's not even like in the top three. What matters are things like, are you good at your job? Do you feel good at your job? Your colleagues, do you feel like you're part of a community of people with your colleagues? And maybe even most important, do you feel like your work it means something? Do you have a sense of purpose about your work, that you're making a difference? That's what drives us. If these themes sound familiar, well, they should. These are all themes that can be found and surfaced in your customers' CX feedback stories to you. Do that. Control your company's CX narrative. Don't just do it, but prioritize it, even over KPIs and metrics, and you'll succeed in getting your employees' hearts in the game. But Max, you might say, isn't this just kind of, feel-good granola stuff? No. The science behind this is absolutely amazing. It's concrete and it will just floor you. Later in the season, we'll get into some of the science of this, and we'll show you a study performed by the Smarties at the London School of Business, Harvard Business School, and the University of Michigan. But for now, spoiler alert, companies who successfully control the narrative and are able to repeat back to their employees in environments like call centers, customer service teams, things like that, stories of those same employees making uniquely great contributions are able to achieve lower employee churn, fewer sick days per employee, and higher CSAT scores. Does that sound good? Does that sound like a pretty convincing way to show ROI on your CX initiatives? I think it does. If you're in CX, and especially if you're involved in measuring and improving it, there's this huge opportunity to recapture the high ground, to go from just kind of gathering metrics and distributing them to taking a storytelling approach. And that's a really important term, a storytelling approach to getting your customers to really open their hearts and their heads and share the story of how your company impacts their lives, and then controlling the narrative and closing the self-narrative gap and making sure that your employees are consistently hearing this. In terms of the technology tools that can help you power a storytelling approach to controlling your CX self-narrative, we talked a little bit about that last season in episodes 6 and 7. If you haven't seen those, you can go to customerville.com/vlog, and they are freely available. Next week, though, we're going to talk about a skill you need to have that is even more fundamental, which is this. If you are going to take control of your company's CX narrative, if you're going to take a storytelling approach to gathering that information and sharing it with your employees, you sure better understand what makes a great story. Here's a hint. It is not just telling people what's going on. That's journalism, not storytelling, different things. If you really want to understand how to make a story that hooks people, that engages them, and even in the long term keeps them engaged, you've got to understand this. Fortunately, I'm going to have a little bit of help in that regard from these people. Academy Award-winning writer, director, and producer Aaron Sorkin, as well as appearances even by Kate Winslet, Leonardo DiCaprio, and if you can believe this, Charles Darwin. They're all going to help me next week explain the fundamentals of what makes a great story and how you can apply that to telling your company's CX story in engaging ways in your company.